Exploring theology, doctrine, and all of the fascinating subjects in between, broadcasting from an undisclosed location, Dead Men Walking starts
now.
Oh, well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dead Men Walking Podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for visiting dmwpodcast.com, checking us out, checking out the merch, leaving us comments, leaving us reviews. We appreciate it. Just got another 5-star review this week. We do like those. We've got a few 1 and 2 stars. We don't really dwell on those. We just dwell on the 5-star ones. But we like your honest criticism, constructive criticism. We thank you for telling a friend, sharing it with everyone. That's how we bring glory to God, by you guys sharing the podcast. Before we get started, obviously in the pre-roll, you did hear Thank God for Bitcoin as a sponsor of the show. We also have another sponsor, Page 50, and we're going to read through it. It's your business, your legacy. Don't partner with just anyone. You need people you can trust. You go to Page 50. Page 50 is a distinctly Christian company, and that means we do things a little differently. They're committed to providing quality marketing services for all your clients and customers. They're going to help you make the most out of social media platforms, create content, elevate your website so you can grow your impressions and reach your goals. They treat each of their clients' account like their own because they're going to build things that last. From web design to social media management, from consulting to execution, from search engine optimization to grassroots campaigns, it's their desire to help your business tell its story to the wildest audience possible. Go give www.page50.com. That's spelled out PAGEFIFTY.com, and see how these brothers in the Lord can help your business, or click through on the link at the bottom of this episode description. Integrity, innovation, results, Page 50. Stuart and those guys over at Page 50 are just awesome. They've helped us on the podcast with my real estate business. They just do awesome social media stuff. So go support those brothers in the Lord, and obviously support Thank God for Bitcoin as well in the pre-roll. We love those guys supporting the show, being friends of the show, and helping us do what we do. Now, with that being said, and the business out of the way, I want to introduce our guest. Now, he's been on the podcast before. I think it was October, but we only got to sit with him for about 10 or 12 minutes, so we want to get into a little bit more. He's the head of content and education for TGFB. That's Thank God for Bitcoin Media. He served as pastor and church planning missionary in Uruguay alongside his wife and kids. He also helped author Thank God for Bitcoin, The Creation, Corruption, and Redemption of Money. He'll be speaking at the Thank God for Bitcoin conference along with C.R. Wiley. He's a friend of the show. He's been on before, of Theology podcast fame. David Cotrone. Is it Cotrone? Cotrone. He's been on the podcast. Zuby and many others. It's May 16th and 17th in 2023 in Miami Beach, Florida. It's Mr. Jordan Bush. Jordan, how are you doing, sir?
Man, so glad to be back on the program. Man.
I'm glad to have you back because... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I just really appreciated following you, obviously meeting you at Fight Laugh Feast, and being booth buddies, and then and then just following you on Twitter, and seeing what you guys post. So thankful for you guys.
And for those of you listening too, if you hear me cough, I'm gonna try to hit the cough mute button, but I just picked up something over the last day. It was 84 degrees here yesterday, and it is hailing out right now in Michigan. Welcome to Michigan in April. So something's going around, but I'll try not to cough too loud into the microphone there. But met Jordan down in Tennessee. Absolutely love what these guys are doing. You've heard us talk about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, that kind of stuff before. When him and David were on the show down there for just 15, 18 minutes, it was one of our top rated episodes because, crypto is just such a huge subject right now, and especially within the Christian community, believers, the Reformed community, and all that alike. Every time I'm on Twitter and I see you guys doing, what is it called when you do the audio? Is it called a room? It's kind of
Twitter Space.
Space. Yeah, sorry. I did Clubhouse during COVID for a little bit, but I haven't done Twitter yet. You guys always have so many people jumping on there, and you can tell there's a hunger for it. Give us an update. We have some new listeners since October of what you do at Thank God for Bitcoin, what it's all about, in a couple minutes, and then we're going to get into the conference that you're holding because I'm excited about that.
Yeah, appreciate you, man. Yeah, so basically, Thank God for Bitcoin exists to help the church, Christians broadly, understand what Bitcoin is and why it matters, and basically see the ways in which Christians are leveraging Bitcoin for the glory of God and the good of people everywhere. So again, when most people think about Bitcoin, they think about a Ponzi scheme, or they're thinking about this is a get rich quick scheme. All of these things, and the reason why they think that is because there are a bunch of people who think about Bitcoin and try to leverage it and cryptocurrencies more broadly for that purpose. But again, in the same way that the fact that drug dealers were the first ones to use beepers, did not say anything about the beeper, other than that it was
Yeah.
a pretty good and useful innovation.
Yeah.
There's nothing, the fact that people use it for bad things does not say anything about Bitcoin. It just says that there's a utility to Bitcoin that that people have found that serves them in ways that other things don't. And so basically, again, there's Bitcoin. We just basically help Christians understand what Bitcoin is and the different ways that people and Christians all over the world are trying to leverage it and use it to solve very real problems that are faced by people all over the world. So my role is to help create content, and just to help put out podcasts. We're getting ready to launch a couple podcasts. One of our first episodes will be we sat down with Pastor Doug Wilson and kind of talk with him for about an hour about Bitcoin and all kinds of things. And there's a money quote near the end of it that we're definitely going to be leveraging and, just as we talk to people. But
you know what? I think that's a really cool idea. I've heard a lot of subjects that Doug has talked about, and everyone wants to hear his take on stuff.
Yep.
I've never heard him talk about crypto or digital currency really at all. So, everyone who's listening, we'll make sure we link up to that so people can go listen to that, because I think that's going to be a good conversation. I'm glad to see him embracing it. We talked about this a little bit the first time you were on in October, but I've found, for all of these Christians and like my parents that were raising me in the 80s and 90s, and they were part of the moral majority, and they were, the government's oppressive and they won't let us homeschool and they won't let us do all these things. And oh my gosh, we're, in the mid 80s, we were 10 years removed from the gold standard. And I remember my dad talking about it. I'll tell you what, that generation seems to have the most trepidation about crypto, or more specifically Bitcoin, which we can talk about how you specifically focus on Bitcoin because it's truly decentralized. And I go, why aren't that generation, especially, accepting this with open arms? This is decentralized. There's really no government interference. There's a finite amount of it. It's everything you want on the gold standard plus mobile and better, more secure. And I wonder, in your kind of travels, I know you do conferences, write books, you're doing podcasts, creating content. Have you come across that maybe even the younger and older generation than us, and I'll just loop myself in there with you, even though I think you're a couple years younger than me. Have you found that they're becoming a little more accepting of this, or are they still kind of standoffish and bullish on the on crypto and Bitcoin specifically?
Yeah, and honestly, it is changing because there's people out there doing awesome work to help bridge the gap and to help people understand it better. There's a girl, Natalie Brunell, who, she's going on like Fox, different Fox shows. Just kind of basically helping people understand it, helping separate, fact from fiction, as far as things that get said by politicians like Elizabeth Warren, all kinds of people who want to, bring up all kinds of and push back on Bitcoin in all kinds of ways. You had a number of Bitcoiners go on Tucker Carlson's show. So the more that there's Bitcoiners kind of getting out there and explaining what Bitcoin is and what it isn't, I think people are becoming more and more open to it. I think specifically, and this is one of the things that I brought up with Doug in the podcast we did with him, was stuff like the craziness that happened during COVID, during lockdowns, the stuff that happened with the Canadian trucker situation. When you start seeing just governments and politicians, whether it's state governments or national governments, whatever it is, leveraging the dollar banking system to punish free speech and to as a way to lash out at political opponents for holding different opinions that were normative and good up until 5 minutes ago. I think that's a value proposition for Bitcoin that people are responding to, and I think are just going to respond to more and more as that gets talked about more broadly. And so that's part of what we're trying to do is help people think about what are the implications of this. I said one of the things I said to Doug was, hey, like, I know you guys have been saving for years to be able to build a building. They don't want to go into debt. They don't want to do all these things, and like, praise God. But like Doug preaches the full counsel of God's word. So Doug says things that in this day and age, it's not hard to imagine, them getting debanked from whatever bank they're a part of. And
Sure.
the way that the banking system works is they can just snap their fingers and you're cut off from access. Now, can you get that back via the courts? Well, sure. But in the meantime, you don't have access to your money. And so
Yeah.
just that reality of your money in the traditional, fiat monetary banking system, like your money doesn't belong to you. The moment, like there's a lot of people just don't understand what's going on when they put their money in a bank. Like when you put your money in a bank account, you sign paperwork to say you're loaning that money to the bank. And while
Yeah.
they're obligated to give it back to you at some point, they're not obligated to give it to you at the moment you want it. And so this is kind of what we to talk about another recent thing that was in the news. You had the Silicon Valley Bank thing.
Yeah.
These bank runs on these banks where there's nowhere near enough money in these banks for everyone to actually get the money. And that's a result of policies that were instituted during COVID. There are zero reserve requirements for any of these banks right now. So they don't have to hold any cash in their banks. And so,
on
so
top
there's
of
just
already
these issues.
fractional lending for decades and decades. Yeah.
100%. And so literally now these banks are not required to hold any of your money in their physical locations, because so much of what we do every day is we handle and access our money digitally. So we use things like PayPal, and we use our debit cards on websites, and we're not interacting with them. So I just think a lot of people are taking for granted that they understand the way that the monetary system works, and they're taking for granted the trust that they've been able to have in the past, and they're thinking they still live in that world, even though that world has set sail a long time ago. So Bitcoin represents one way to adapt to the new reality that we live in. And so I think the more Christians that understand it, and the more Christians that see the value proposition of not as Bitcoin is this way that I'm going to make copious amounts of money, but Bitcoin is a way that I can, surely have access to my money. I think that's going to be something that more and more people appreciate as the years go by.
Well, not only surely have access to your money, but also have some religious freedom, the way it looks like it's going, like you mentioned,
100%.
right to free speech. Even religious folks, like even secular and atheists, need to understand that they can be canceled. And by canceled, that can go to taking money out of the bank and stopping digital funds. I mean, you mentioned governments taking money from the Canadian truckers. Businesses were doing it. I think GoFundMe just took all the money and gave it to who they wanted. So you had private
100%.
businesses. And I think
PayPal, exactly, something similar.
PayPal, same thing. And I think the distinction we have to make too is, once again, decentralized. I mean, Bitcoin is so scary to the U.S. government that Joe Biden signed some legislation last year and said, "Hey, we need to start looking into this as the U.S. government and switch over to digital." And it's like, well, I don't want a centralized digital currency. I want a finite amount of crypto like Bitcoin that's backed by such an crazy encryption process it can't be duplicated, and have a finite a finite amount of that, and have it decentralized. I think that Christians need to understand. And look, I know you work with people outside of being Christians, but especially I feel like we need to get it through to their heads that this isn't the enemy. This is, I think, a common grace, a blessing of the Lord, a reprieve, if you will, on the wickedness of this, of this global world that's trying to take as much control as they can throughout countries. And here we've been offered a reprieve that says you have a complete autonomy, almost complete autonomy, I would say, when it comes to Bitcoin. Now, I think they're going to try to set some things up, gatekeepers and things like that, because it scares the crap out of them. You can't when you can't control a currency, you can't control a people.
100%. And so again, and that makes sense. And so that throws a lot of people off initially. They're like, well, they're going to gatekeep and they're going to keep it. But you don't have to go through gatekeepers. You can do peer-to-peer Bitcoin transactions the same as you do peer-to-peer cash transactions. And so I can use an app on my phone, and that, they can, even if they shut down the app, there's things that I can buy that can allow me to transfer Bitcoin peer-to-peer in the same way that I would do with cash. In a way that gives me the same benefits of cash, but in a digital form, decentralized form. And so I just think a lot of some of this is just technological know-how. Like, we try to use, people think about Bitcoin and their eyes glaze over, and, and to encourage those people, if you look up videos from 15, 20 years ago, there were people talking about email and their eyes glazed over. There's people talking about all these things. And so this is just what happens always with technology. It initially seems impossible, and then 5 years later, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. You just take it for granted. Everybody's doing it. And so I just think with Bitcoin, it takes time for people to understand it, but the value proposition is 100% there. This is what I want people to know is John Huss, like Martin Luther, Calvin, all these dudes, they would be using Bitcoin if they existed. Like cryptography. I'm actually writing something. I'm in the process of writing a short book about some of these ideas. And one of the ideas is just like cryptography is a gift from God. Like Martin Luther, he would be leveraging cryptography to the hilt because it allows him. If you think about what cryptography is, it's actually really profound from a theological level. If you think about like what did Jesus do? Jesus revealed himself to certain people and not to others. He told the truth to certain people and not to others. Jesus told certain people who he healed, don't tell anybody. Don't tell people. So what is going on? Jesus is he wants to package the truth and give it to certain people at the expense of giving it to other people. This is where our Arminians have lots of problems because it doesn't make sense. If your presupposition is, if you assume Jesus is trying to reach as many people at one time as possible, there's lots of things that Jesus does that don't make sense. But so what I would say is like cryptography does something very similar. Cryptography is designed to protect information so that certain people can access it and other people can't. And this is a good and godly use for, it's a good and godly thing to do. This is prophecy. This is what prophecy is. God goes and talks to the prophet and reveals himself to the prophet, tells his plan to the prophet, and then tells the prophet to go and tell it to the people. God didn't just go to all those people. He sent the prophet to do it. And so there's something very similar going on with cryptography more broadly, where you can, encrypt a message and send it so that nobody can access it unless they have the encrypted key. And so this is already being leveraged by, to send, information into closed countries where it's illegal to be a Christian. And the fact that we could apply this thing to money is an incredible gift that, again, if this was the revolution or the Reformation, this is exactly the type of tool that the reformers would have used to get their message out across the world. So,
sure. If nothing else, to fund their trips out of the country away from the Pope, who was trying to burn them alive at the time, right?
100%. And how are you going to pay? How are you going to pay your printing? To get your books printed and all these kind of things. Like it's exactly the type of thing. So we look at Bitcoin. It's this strategic, timely tool that God has given us so that we can solve some of the specific challenges that we're facing right now. I don't think Bitcoin is the panacea. It's not the second coming of Jesus. It's not going to fix every problem, but it's a useful and good tool that solves targeted, very important issues that we really are facing.
Okay, so outside of making content and promoting Bitcoin and kind of educating, are you in the investing space at all? And maybe this will lead us into the conference that's coming up in May. Are you teaching people maybe how to invest with it at all, or how to use it to make money, or is it strictly educational in the way of how to start using it as a daily or weekly or monthly currency?
Yeah, basically, and this is where people get like they just assume, right? They see, thank God for Bitcoin, their eyes glaze over, and they're like the level of cringe I cannot handle. And so we're like, okay, again, we did it to provoke a response. We put that very somewhat cringe name on it, but no, our point is basically we just want to help people understand what money is, like what is money, and why does that matter. And so like that's a big part of this. It's like it's people who you talk about theology, and people are like, no, I don't want to talk about theology. I want to get down to the practical level. And of course, like the practical is really important, but the theology matters. Like the philosophy, the ideas behind things matter. And them being rooted in reality is really important. And so that's the first part of our conference is going to be focused on that, of just talking about the philosophy and the theology behind money itself. Like what is money designed to do, and what does that have to do with the way that God has revealed himself and the way that God has designed the world. So that's primarily what we're doing. But then also we are going to be providing like a hands-on like basic tutorial of how to use Bitcoin. Like how do I buy it? How do I interact with it? How do I transfer some to somebody else? Like, again, a lot of these, the complexity, it seems super complex, and so people don't even get to step one. Our goal is to walk people through the step one, step two, step three, and then it'll be less intimidating for them to interact with something like Bitcoin. And then day 2 of the conference is all it's all ways we're going to be talking with groups of people who are using Bitcoin all over the world, and we're going to just be talking to them about why they and how they are using it in the different contexts that they're in. So, for example, we're going to have one panel where there's going to be 4 missionaries on the panel, people who are actual missionaries today, helping people in the Middle East, helping people in refugee communities in the United States. There's going to be people who are all over the world using Bitcoin to further the gospel. We have another one where it's going to end up a panel for Bitcoin in churches. What does that look like? And so we have at least 2 ruling elders in PCA, Presbyterian churches who are Bitcoiners, who've been in Bitcoin for a long time. Again, who are not primarily looking at Bitcoin. They're not looking at Bitcoin like, this is how I'm going to get rich. It's no, like this. Let's think about Bitcoin as a, this is one part of a long-term, diversified portfolio that is in a very real sense, a type of insurance against, what always has historically happened to fiat currencies, which is they go to zero. And so, Bitcoin, talking about what is the role, how should churches and, both pastors and the people making the economic decisions, the financial decisions with those churches, how can they think about Bitcoin as one part of what they're doing? So we're trying to do a balance of both, a balance of the philosophy of these things and the practical, tangible ways to implement them.
So day 1, more the philosophy, day 2, kind of the way to implement them. It sounds like this would be good for elders, pastors, leaders, business owners. I mean,
Yes,
if
100%.
you are any of those influencing spaces to get information and to have it in Miami, it sounds like it's going to be. I'm looking at hail up here. Boy, if I could get down there, I would like to see the weather, see the friends, and talk about crypto for a couple days.
Yeah. So yeah,
you've got
I
some
think,
awesome speakers.
Yeah. So that's been something that honestly has kind of blown us away. So, I mean, we had some really good speakers last year. We had like Tim Tebow stop by again. Tim Tebow he's not like the biggest Bitcoin guy, but so with him, we just were like, hey, let's talk about stewardship. Like, this guy has more resources than the vast majority of us will ever dream about having. And so, and he's like very vocal about his faith and very vocal about, trying to leverage the resources that God's put in his hands for God's glory and the good of people all over the world. So we talked with him, but in this case, this year, one of the people who you mentioned, and one of the people I've been following for years, I've been a big fan of the podcast, has been C.R. Wiley. Read his books, listened to a bunch of his podcasts, and just really appreciated him. And so I just reached out and asked him if he'd be interested in coming. And he's like, absolutely. And so again, so he's going to be speaking. He's one of our headline speakers. The other one we invited, and I think they were going to come, they would love to come, was Doug Wilson and Ben Merkel. I've spoken to Ben a number of times about New St. Andrews. New St. Andrews accepts Bitcoin. So I was talking to them, wanted to have them there to talk about the role of money in education, and to have, Doug just speak just more broadly. But Doug's grandson is getting married one of the days of the conference, so they couldn't be there. So hopefully next year we'll get him there. But
no, it's so good. And I mean, CR is so learned, and when he comes on the podcast, he's got 5 different ways to look at things. I'd be really interested in his talk down there and how he's going to talk about Bitcoin and digital currency. And obviously he is a historian, not just in church history, but throughout global history. So that is a good main speaker to have down there. But I mean, you're going to be talking. Can you give us a little hint? We don't want you to give away too much, but like, what are you going to hit on down there when it's your turn to talk?
Yeah. So basically my talk is going to be on a theology of money. And so again, one of the things that I basically say all the time is just that Christians have done a fantastic job about talking about the morality of what we do with money.
Okay.
Like even in the last 100 years, like we talk about stewardship and we talk about, using your ways or using the resources that God has put in your hands for eternal purposes. Like how can you invest the resources and specifically money that God has put in your hands to, expand his kingdom, to preach the gospel here, all over the world. How can you do that? But there's another aspect of money and something that Christians ought to think about when it comes to money that hasn't been talked about anywhere near as much over specifically like the last 100 years in the United States. And that's the ethics of the ethical concerns of money production itself. So like what are the moral things? What are the moral considerations that need to happen when you think about, just like the creation of money itself? So why is this matter? Because there's fundamentally two different ways throughout history that people have looked at money. One is that money is a product that has a cost associated with the production of it, and by having fixed costs associated with it, it roots itself in the world that actually exists. Now, that's all sounds highfalutin. Here's an example. So for a long time, gold and silver has been used as money. Now, why?
Yeah.
Gold and silver has properties that basically makes it lasts for a long time. There's a relative scarcity involved. It's easy to imprint an image of somebody. It's easier to distinguish what is real silver versus what is a real silver or gold versus what is not real silver or gold.
Sure.
And then another side of this is that the gold and silver requires production costs. So I have to pay people to go out into the world to dig up the gold and silver, to process it. I have to, build machines or buy machines that help that production process. So there is a relationship, to put it in Christian parlance, there's a relationship between sowing and reaping. I have to actually sow real world effort, energy, cost, whatever it is, in order to produce gold currency or gold coins or silver coins at the end of the day.
Sure.
That's one way of looking at the world. The other way of looking at that has happened throughout time is that governments or central banks have said, we're going to create fiat currency, which is basically it's money that only has value because we say so. And so what that means is we're going to take this piece of paper that is literally, that costs a fraction of a penny. We're going to take this piece of paper, we're going to put ink on it, and on some of them we're going to put tens, on other ones we're going to put hundreds. What's the difference between the $10 bill and the $100 bill? Really, it's just a little bit more ink is the only functional difference between the production of those two things. And what that does is fiat currency, paper fiat currency, enables governments to expand their power and to expand their power with very little cost. And so functionally what that does is it allows governments to act like gods. It allows them to say, because again, who creates value out of thin air? Only God. Only God can speak, and then real, tangible, valuable things are created. Governments can't do that. People are not gods. But fiat currencies have enabled governments to act like gods, to functionally be gods. And part of what comes with that is by creating as much money, they can create as much money as they want to. And then by having that money, they can then go out and subsidize whatever message, whatever idea that they want to subsidize. So we see this in the form of, the transgender insanity, the LGBT, all that stuff. Why has that been able to those ideas? How have they gotten so widespread throughout the world? Well, it's because the United States has the ability to produce money to incentivize those kind of ideas. They reward people. They create schools. The government, most people are educated in public schools. They give money to those schools, and then they control what those schools teach. And so by doing that, you're by controlling and subsidizing certain messages and ideas at the expense of others, the governments are creating their own reality. They're creating a world according to their own image and in their own likeness, whatever they want. It's a world where they're the gods ruling over it. who have ultimate authority in doing all these things. So again, those are two fundamentally different ways to look at the world. One looks at money and says, we who are creating the money are people. We're created in God's image. We are stewards, not gods. And so we have to abide by, to create money, we are going to abide by the rules that God has designed the world with, which is the law of sowing and reaping. In the book of Galatians, the Apostle Paul goes so far as to say, God is not mocked. For what a man sows, that will he also reap. So Paul goes so far to say that sowing and reaping is so hardwired into the world that to deny it is to mock God. We see Jesus saying God will give to each one according to his works. We see that there's a relationship between sowing and reaping, that this is an instrumental part of God's designing the world. Why couldn't God just forgive us for our sins? Why couldn't he just say your sins are forgiven? Why did he have to send Jesus? It's because actions have consequences.
Sure.
And so fiat currency denies that reality. It basically allows governments to reap where they haven't sown. And it allows governments to act like they are unlimitedly, they are all powerful, omnipotent, and can create whatever reality they want. And so that has had and continues to have awful consequences here at home, here in the United States, but also all over the world. It's way worse because there's lots of places that don't have a currency that's as widely used as the US dollar. So all these factors really make it very difficult on people around the world.
I would argue too that they violate the 10 Commandments too when they inflate currency on purpose
100%.
and steal value from me. Money is nothing more than labor monetized. Labor is my time. And when you devalue or inflate through inflationary practices the dollar, you're stealing that from me. You're stealing time, which is the most limited resource that I have, or the 100%. Most unknown resource, right?
Yes.
So I definitely see the argument against fiat currency because I grew up in that family, right? My father talking about why aren't we on the gold standard or what's going, So I vote, and I said years ago, geez, we're just playing this big game where dollars are just monopoly money. They're no longer backed by a federal note where I could, what was it, 50 years ago, go into the bank and say, hey, I want $1 worth of silver for this. It's a federal note, right? We're off of that. But what would you say to detractors as we wrap this up here too? Detractors that might say, well, maybe crypto is the exact same way. It just has value because other people think it has value. We know that there's scarcity, in the blockchain, but why couldn't someone argue, say, well, gold or silver has a physical use in the real world. Bitcoin doesn't, or crypto doesn't. You're just doing the same thing the fiat companies doing, but digitally. How would you argue against that?
Yep. And again, it's a question that makes sense, but it's misinformed in that basically there is something backing Bitcoin. The thing that's backing Bitcoin is in the same way that when you to produce gold, you had to have the picks and the shovels and the guys, you had to pay them and you had to do all these things. There's something very similar happening within Bitcoin, which is in order for Bitcoin to come into to be issued, you have to invest money in Bitcoin mining computers that are using. So the computers are real computers. So you have to buy the computers. You have to store them in a real physical place. So you might have to pay a mortgage or buy the building where you're going to store them. You have to pay for the electricity cost. So there's a real sense in which there are real world tangible goods involved in the production of Bitcoin. It seems weird because it's digital currencies, but it's rooted in real world goods. So that's the first thing. First thing I would say in terms of the production, it's every bit as real as something like gold. Now, again, at the end, what's the primary difference? You don't have something a physical representation of all of that work. That is the coin of gold itself, which that is both feature and bug. Okay. So gold's physicality, most people think of, oh, that's a great thing. Well, in our church in Uruguay, half of our church were Venezuelan immigrants. To them, gold would be a liability if they were trying to bring their gold with them from Venezuela to Uruguay. So again, they had to walk across a border. And when they walked across the border, there's all kinds of bad people who were, who could rob you if they see you carrying. Imagine if you're carrying like a bag of gold or something. People see that they're gonna rob you right away. So there is a sense in which, in some cases, depending on the threat model, gold's physicality is of a benefit. There's other cases in which it's a problem. It actually
Yeah.
creates a threat model, or it creates a
Well, that's why
vulnerability yeah.
it's one of the reasons why vaults and banks were created in the first
Exactly.
place. You can't go around carrying around 50, 60, 70 pounds of gold 100 years ago.
100%.
And just to interject very quickly too, if it really comes down to a situation, whether it be in a established country or in a third world country or developing nation, as they say now, what good is a block of gold really going to do me if I need food, shelter, water,
Yep.
outside of being able to make some, transistors in a computer with gold?
Yep.
Isn't gold just another means of replacing a paper dollar or a digital currency for exchange? And it's much more clunky.
Yep.
So in a situation to where we have an issue where we have electrical outages or gas outages or something like that, like a catastrophic event, what is I look at it, and I've said this for many years, and my father, he's kind of in a different camp. So we get into these arguments.
Yep.
Who's better off? The guy standing there with a block of gold, or a guy who has something that's fluid and digital and can be sent back and forth, and they can both buy me water, shelter, food, whatever that is. So I kind of see it as antiquated, gold and silver.
And again, you're right. Again, I'm the most sympathetic person to gold. Like I think gold is. I'm not here saying nobody should own gold. I think all of these things you're talking about, there's situations in which they make sense and they're valuable. And I think, like, if I look at the trend toward the way that things are going, I think gold is going to be valuable. Like it's still going to go up in value again, because it depends on what you're comparing it to. If you're talking about versus US dollars, gold is going to do great because gold is still scarce.
Well, most things
way
will
more scarce. Yeah, exactly. But
oak wood is probably going to do 100% well soon.
Exactly, 100%. And so if they left the tree in its original form, it'd be worth more than the paper it's burning.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think another thing, again, to the value proposition, again, because people were like, initially it's unintuitive. It's not clear to a lot of people what Bitcoin's value is. But what is the value of having access to something that no person can, that I don't need a mediator for? I don't have to trust my Bitcoin to a bank and risk not being able to access it. This is all these people at that Silicon Valley Bank. This is one of the biggest banks, like the 17th largest bank in the country. This whole thing, of course, I feel safe with my money in there. And they felt safe until they didn't, until they tried to go get their money out and their money wasn't there. And like with Bitcoin, again, I can access it 24/7, 365. There's no weekends for Bitcoin. And so I can access it. I can send it anywhere in the world, and there's nothing that anybody can do to intermediate that transaction, short of coming to my door and taking it from me. But even then, again, like I can store my Bitcoin. I can memorize a 12-word passphrase and cross any border in the world, and nobody knows I even have it. And then I get where I'm going. I plug those 12 words into a Bitcoin wallet, and boom, I've got access to my Bitcoin. It can transfer it, buy things, whatever I need to do. So again, I think a lot of the reason why people don't see the value proposition of Bitcoin is because they're living in a situation in which things they think things are a certain way, and things have had a certain level of trustworthiness and stability that is not just guaranteed to be there for all of time. It's just,
I don't think the general population, I think it's getting better, but I don't think the general population understand how much we're teetering on the edge, how fragile the monetary system is.
Yes.
5 or 6 years ago, I work in real estate, and in commercial real estate, I can go 3 or 4 months without receiving any type of commission check or money. And then have large amounts of money come in to where a bank will go, well, we have to hold a $75,000 check for this many days. Right. And I might have to move large amounts of money around or withdraw them. And I remember 5 years ago, I went to my bank, which is a national large bank. And they said, oh, in this branch, we don't keep any more than $12,000 in the vault. And now $12,000 is not a lot of money. Now I understand it is a lot of money, but when I'm dealing with larger sums where I could move 10 or 20,000, every couple of weeks, I went, you got to be kidding. Oh, you come back in 7 days and we'll order it and we'll have the Brinks guy drop it off. And this was 5 years ago, and I just went, "Oh my gosh, this is such a fragile system."
Yes.
And if anyone ever made run on banks, we saw it like was it
Yep.
SV, like you were talking about, is it
Yep.
SVC?
It was SVB. Yeah. Silicon Valley
SVB,
Bank.
sorry.
Yep.
So I hope that people start listening to guys like you before it's too late. They need to be before everything crashes or a major crash of some sort happens. And we're not conspiracy theorists here. I mean, you talk
Yep.
to any any mainline broker, anyone in the financial services, they understand how fragile the monetary system is. And I think that's why Bitcoin keeps hanging around. And I think that's why we keep seeing all these other cryptos that aren't real cryptos at all. They're centralized. They can be traded. There's no limit to them. Dogecoin and all the rest. We've talked about that before. Those are a joke. If you want to try to make a couple bucks on them, go have fun. But that's why I think you guys really promoting Bitcoin. It is the moral currency. And it's kind of what you said you're going to be talking about at the conference about the theology of money. And when I look at fiat currency and then I look at Bitcoin, I see Bitcoin as a believer, as someone who believes in the inherency of Scripture and the Word of God. I go, well, that's the moral monetary system, not the fiat government ran, right? Federal Reserve currency.
Yeah. And again, I will be the first one. Like, that sounds insane. Like, when you first said that, like, how in the world is Bitcoin a moral? Like, that sounds crazy. And again, it sounds crazy, but it's not crazy in that, again, how is anything moral? And in the way, like, one of the ways that, so Romans 1, one of the things that God says, this is what the wicked don't do. They refuse to acknowledge him as God or be thankful to him. So what does it mean to acknowledge God? What does that look like? It means to take account for how he has designed the world and submit yourself to that design. It means you don't just set aside it, like, so in that way, if that's what humility is submitting yourself to God, then arrogance would be setting aside what God has said and setting up your own thing. And so literally that is the story of fiat currencies, is governments setting aside any kind of thing that would restrain them in order to create a money that they control completely and can create ad infinitum. And so this is, I mean, even if you just look throughout history, like, hard money has been one of the things that's limited the length of wars. Like, one of the reasons why we haven't had endless wars throughout most of human history is because the soldiers basically get to a point where they refuse to accept, like, they diminish the money supply down. So let's say they use silver coins. Well, they get to the point where over time, this happened in Rome. It's happened all over the place, where the rulers keep introducing more and more lesser metals into the monetary supply, so that there's less and less silver, for example, in each coin. Well, you get to the point where people understand that this thing is worthless. This thing has no silver in it. And so it just becomes worthless. And so, like, this is an example of the same kind of thing is happening with dollars. It always happens with fiat currencies. This happened. It's nothing new. It's happened all throughout human history. And the speed at which it happens in the last days is just bonkers. People are like, I see that prices have gone up in the last few years. Well, yeah, but the crazier thing is, the reason why prices have gone up is because since 2020, when they were airdropping money to everybody, 40% of all of the dollars that have ever existed were created in the last 3 or 4 years. It's insane. 40%. Like, I was like, there's no way that can be true. I'm like, there's no. It's 100% true. You can look it up.
Yeah, and we've existed for almost 250 years as a country. In the last 2 years, we've printed 40% of our monetary supply. Yeah.
And so again, like, the inflation, people, you hear people talk about, oh, we have a 2% inflation target. Well, it's like, okay, well, I want you to think about what that means. So 2%. So if 50 years goes by, you've lost 100% of what you're doing. You've lost 100% of your buying power. And so again, like, a lot of these issues, they're hard to keep track of because they kill you. It's death by 1,000 cuts. If they steal from you slowly enough, you don't really object to it. It's the frog in the pot analogy. You just keep turn up the temperature a little bit at a time, and then you turn around and one day you're dead because the frog is dead because he got used to the rising temperature until the point where he was unable to do anything about it. And so again, so with Bitcoin, basically what we're, with Thank God for Bitcoin, the purpose of this conference is to help people think, again, even if people walk away and they don't buy Bitcoin, at least they'll have thought more about the nature of what money is and why that matters, spiritually speaking. Like if that's the only thing people took away and Bitcoin died tomorrow, that part would still have incredible value to people. And then, but even beyond that, if Bitcoin is going to continue to grow the way that it has, then having a tool that enables me to send money from here where I am in Florida to the Middle East in 10 minutes with no, with very little fee, with all these different things that is impossible to stop. Like that's an incredibly valuable tool for advancing the spread of the gospel. And so again, we're just trying to help people see Bitcoin is better money. Whatever else you think about it, it's better money. It has disadvantages. Again, it's electric. It's all these things. But again, everything in this world, we're not trying to say Bitcoin there's nothing that can happen to. No, of course, right. Bitcoin is a tool, and every tool has strengths and weaknesses and all these things. So we're trying to help people think about Bitcoin as one part of a broader strategy to help you deal with the real problems and risks, threats that are out there. Bitcoin is one great tool. It's not going to be a replacement for a house. It's not going to be a replace for you can't eat Bitcoin. So if you're talking about, if you're for some reason trying to force a binary choice, one or the other, well, then you should take the other. But like, in the world that we live in the real world that we have, there's multiple threat models, and we're trying to balance those threat models and have insurance in all of those cases. And Bitcoin represents, insurance for a number of those threat models. So
awesome. All right. Once again, as we wrap it up here, tell everyone when, where, and why for the conference.
Yeah. So basically we're, if you go to tgfb.com, you can find the information about the conference there. We have 3 different ticketing options. There's one, there's a 2-day pass for the conference. The address and everything will be on the website as well, but there's a 2-day option. There's a 1-day ticket option if you can only make, either the 16th or the 17th, or for folks like, our buddy, our Dead Man Walking friends who are up in Michigan, we have a live stream option as well. We invested heavily in a 5-camera setup, basically to make everyone be able to feel like they're actually there. It's going to be a super high quality, setup. So we would love for you to be able to participate that way. You can, again, I think Greg mentioned this in the intro, but if you use promo code TGFB23, that'll get you 15% off any of the ticketed options. And we'd love to have you there in Miami if you can get there. And otherwise we'd love to just have you participate via the live stream.
Awesome. Jordan, thanks so much for taking time out. Every time you come on, it's very educational. I really appreciate the passion in which you talk about these things. And I know that I'm not going to be able to make the conference. Hopefully next year I'll schedule it, but I know it's going to be an awesome conference. And we're going to make sure we link up everything we talked about. So it'll be very easy for you guys listening to this. Scroll down anywhere you get your podcasts. All the links will be there, tickets, promo codes, all that good stuff, where you can find Jordan as well too, on Twitter and social media and all those places. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dead Men Walking Podcast. We appreciate you. And as always, God bless. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Dead Men Walking Podcast for full video podcast episodes and clips, or email us at deadmenwalkingpodcast@gmail.com.